But yeah, so welcome to the second salon in this series on the viral cure, making sense of internet discourse. In this second salon, we have Santiago Ramos. He is the executive editor at Wisdom of Crowds and senior research editor at the Philosophy and Society Initiative at the Aspen Institute. And he writes for Commonweal and Plow Quarterly. So Santi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's a great pleasure. I'm a big fan of Intellect, also of your work.
Thank you. And we go way back, many years.
We do.
But the reason I invited you to join us for this salon is because I've been following Wisdom of Crowds for a while now, and I've been really fascinated by this crowdsource, this kind of newsletter you send out, aggregating different news stories, commentary on current events, and adding your own spin on things, kind of framing these different stories for your followers to kind of to piece together all these different takes on what's going on in the world around us. And I mean, it shows to me that like you're going through so many different news sources, all these different stories swirling around on the mediascape, and you really have this ability to discern, okay, like what's really going on here? What's most important? What's most worth my attention? How do I make sense of I don't know, the different perspectives, the different biases that we see, and actually yeah, discern some sense out of it all. I feel that many of us get overwhelmed with the amount of content on the internet, the amount of information we're receiving about what's going on in politics and society in general. So I wanted to invite you on to tell us a little bit about how you sift through all this content, how you check your own biases when reading different news sources. But before we jump into the talking about the crowdsource itself, tell us a little bit about your own background, and then tell us about Wisdom of Crowds. What is it? What is its mission, etc.?
Well, so my background is in academia. I used to be a professor of philosophy, and if you know anything about the state of humanities academia, you know that it's very hard to get a job. And I was always sort of I always kept like a hand in journalism by writing book reviews and articles for Commonweal. And if you know anything about journalism, you also know that it's hard to get a job there. So eventually, though, I after being a professor for a few years, I left and I got a normal corporate job, working in HR, in fact. And gradually, I inched myself forward in a sort of media career, thanks to this Aspen Philosophy and Society initiative, where we basically we convene people and resources together to promote the public exercise of philosophy. So public thought deepened by philosophy. And one of the projects that we have is this site called Wisdom of Crowds, which was founded by Shadi Hamid and Damir Marusic, both of whom right now are in the Washington Post. Shadi is a columnist and Damir is a editorial page editor. And both sort of made their name in like foreign policy journalism in DC. But they're interested in a lot of things. They're interested in music and religion and ideas in general. And they started this website as a sort of side project to try to explore what they call first principles, meaning the core ideas that animate politics, like your fundamental beliefs, and try to have like interesting conversations on the podcast that would bring out people's core convictions in a sort of frank, fun way. This started in like 2019 during the I think earlier 2018 maybe, during the first Trump term, when there was a lot of you guys remember it. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of new ideas in the air. There was a thing called the alt-right. And there was a desire to try to talk to people whose beliefs were different than yours. So they sort of jumped into that world. And it developed and it grew. And then eventually Aspen acquired it. And then I became editor. And one of the things that we wanted to do to advance the website was give it some sort of unifying piece of content every week. And that's how we developed Crowdsource. So Crowdsource does the same thing that the podcast does in a different format. It captures a sort of debate or narrative or discussion that's happening in the public square, usually about politics in one way or another, but also we do a lot about technology, the intersection between technology and just human life, We do the occasional thing about art and culture, like we did something on the Great Gatsby anniversary the other week, and sometimes religion. And so it's like a newsletter that's supposed to give you a sense of a narrative and a debate that's happening in the world of arts and letters. And and yeah, so it's that's how it was born. That's the idea. And like my background in philosophy helps a lot, obviously, because we were trained in philosophy to digest a lot of ideas and to simplify them for our students when we teach. And it's also a way of writing a story. I mean, it's a newsletter. It's a bunch of links, but if you want to compete with like ChatGPT, you have to do something interesting with it, right? So we always try to make it unique. We try to show a narrative that emerges in the debate. Have interesting associations there that you wouldn't find in ChatGPT, things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, what's interesting to me is that there's always some kind of broader framing of these different links and stories that you're presenting in the crowdsource, and this is part of Wisdom of Crowd's mission to kind of present current events through the lens of first principles, to kind of step back and ask, okay, so what are the greater values, the greater questions implicated in what's going on in the world today? Which, I mean, when I read the crowdsource, when I read, the different articles that are posted, it's kind of it orients you. It gives you a sense of grounding because I don't know. I mean, if there's no kind of meta narrative, no greater lens through which we view what's going on in the world, like it's bewildering. It's extremely confusing because you have all these different sources, all these different stories with conflicting biases, conflicting angles. How am I
Mhm.
supposed to make sense of it? How do I draw everything together? So, say a little bit more though about like trying to ground all this content in first principles and this kind of larger framework.
Mhm. Well, is it okay if I share my screen and show you one of the
Yeah,
crowdsource
yeah, go
things?
for it.
Just so that you know like what we're talking about, if you're not a subscriber on this call. But basically,
Oh wow, yeah.
yeah. So basically, like the first thing that our job is to inform, and the second is to provoke. I think those are the only two tasks that a journalist really has. Everything else is kind of gravy or pretentious. But for example, like we lean one of the things that we say, our motto you can see up here is agreement is nice, disagreement is better. And it feels tongue in cheek. But the reason why we say that is because it feels more real to air our disagreements than to create a fake consensus, especially in American democracy. And a lot of the problems, for example, one of the reasons, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but there's a lot of ways that Democrats, for example, assumed that a lot of people agreed with them on things, and then they would be surprised on election day. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is something that is the case. And we think it's better to know about disagreements than to pretend that there aren't any. And this is one of the manifestations of that conviction. So, for example, on this stuff with the debate over Colmar Abrego Garcia, the man who was deported, who may or may not have ties to the Venezuelan gang, and in any case was deported to the one country he couldn't be deported to, which was El Salvador. What do we try to do? We try to just, first of all, inform the reader, but also inform him about the disagreement to the greatest detail possible and with the greatest nuance possible. And like, for example, this week we chose to focus just on the debate within the right. Because even within the right wing lawyers are fighting it out, and they disagree a lot about on what's going on. So to me, as you know, I'm not a Republican, but I think this is an interesting debate and something that is useful to know, and it's useful to know beyond just the case itself. But you end up learning a lot about just the different trains of thought within the right and where they might lead in the near future. So, like, there's an interesting debate here between two law professors on the right about due process, and that's stuff that can stick with you. You can pick it up, think about it later. Another thing that we try to do is when there's like a term that somebody uses that seems technical or obscure, we make we make it have its own focus in the section of the crowdsource. So like transitional justice. A lot of people, when they saw this tweet by this lawyer named Adrian Vermeule, who talks about transitional justice as a way to justify deportation, basically. People are like, what the F is transitional justice? And at first I thought the guy was just making this up. But then, you know, you do research and you figure out that there actually is like this whole field in legal theory about transitional justice that this lawyer may have been misapplying, but it's still a real thing. Um, and out of that, we craft another story. We try to follow a thread. We try to figure out why people think the things that they think about. And there's a little bit of a flair for the dramatic. So, like, Van centers the phrase, a sort of dramatic phrase, comes at the end, comes out of nowhere in a bit, in a way, just like Vance himself came out of nowhere on Twitter and intervened in this debate. So that's what we try to do: provoke, inform, and entertain, I guess, a little bit. Um, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Maybe I spoke for too long there.
No, I mean, but in order to do what you're doing, like this requires a kind of attitude of detachment in a way from what you're reading. I mean, rather than jumping to react emotionally immediately. And I wonder, I mean, somebody could play devil's advocate and say, okay, well, in order to have such a detached position and say, okay, well, rather than being really angry and pissed off by whatever JD Vance said, I'm going to be curious about this. I'm going to be like, okay, what does he mean? Does that require a certain, like, does someone who has a lot of skin in the game, can they afford to take that kind of position? Like, what would you say to someone who kind of, would counter this position
Right.
of
So
detachment,
like
curiosity?
if you're actually part of the population that could be deported, you don't
Yeah.
have the the luxury to just take a step back and be analytical and objective about things. And fair enough. There is something to be said for that. I mean, I know people in my neighborhood that are affected by this stuff, but I would just say that as a journalist, what's like we all have vocations, we all have the little task that's been given to us in this world, you know. Some people are firemen, some people are doctors, other people are journalists. And the one thing that I can provide is a sort of information for people in democracy to do their thing. Um, and but you're right though that the detachment is not easy. And there's two things that I always remember when I'm doing something, which is one is like you have to have a question.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in questions, not just for not just because you have to ask a question in order to get an answer. To get information, you have to ask questions and curiosity and all that stuff that your parents tell you when you're a kid. But also, like a question really is predetermines where you're going to go in your investigation, right? So if I want to understand something, I have to get the question right.
Yeah.
And for example, if my question is like, why is all of this happening? Why is Trump doing what he's doing? Um, my question has to be precise. It has to be okay. I have to understand the school of thought where the right is coming from and where they're getting their justifications for their actions. And that sort of leads me to read particular people, to follow particular Twitter accounts, you know, to listen to certain people that I might not agree with. But I sort of have to silence myself and follow where the question leads me. And the other thing is love in a way, like love the truth more than your opinion of the truth, which is what will guide you to the truth. You know, your affection has to be not just for your view, but for the truth itself. And that's a sort of compass that I keep. Um, and yeah, like, and I have to think, look, I don't always publish a crowdsource that has only the opinions of right wing lawyers. That was just, one example.
Mhm.
But, that's never going to be the whole picture. That's just my contribution to what's going on is to provide some information.
Yeah.
But yeah, questioning and loving the truth are the two things I think.
Yeah. So I mean, this talk about the journalist vocation as loving the truth more than your whatever your preconceived notion of the truth is. Some might argue that, well, that's the real vocation of the journalist is, to put forward some kind of noble political goal, some kind of agenda. Um, I mean, if we take the kind of standard Hegelian Marxist view that, like, no, it's not about some transcendent truth that we're seeking beyond us. It's like there's something in front of us that we need to push for. And all this talk about, ideals, abstractions, these questions, rather than, again, like the political goal, is a waste of time. I mean, what do you say to people who would say, well, no, your real vocation is to accomplish something, not just to open a question and seek truth?
Yeah, no, I mean, part of, I think that's fundamentally right, um, in one sense. Like, I am pursuing something good out of my work. I'm not just doing it for neutral reasons. I think it's good to inform the public. It's good to give people access to the truth, right? Um, and I'm not doing like investigative journalism or something that focuses on a particular evil and then tries to expose it. But I think it's not neutral to do the little that you can to make it easier for people to access the truth and to think for themselves and be able to act accordingly. And we have no shortage of like opinion pieces in Wisdom of Crowds as well. Just not in the newsletter, but on Tuesdays we publish opinion. And I think like people won't listen to your opinions unless they also know that you care about the truth, right? So like um there's a lot of you can tell a columnist, for example, that wrestles with the truth versus another one that's just giving you their sort of like predetermined ideological opinion.
Mhm.
And they're, like the conservative columnist in the New York Times, Ross Dowlett, surprisingly popular among liberals and leftists. In fact, they just interviewed him in this like major left-wing magazine in England called the New Left Review, which is only for like the top leftist professors in the world. All of a sudden, they ran an interview with this conservative guy from New York, and why is that? It's not because they agree with him, but it's because you can sort of tell that Rostow that struggles to try to figure out if something is true. And I think that's what people are attracted to in a writer. Maybe even more so than their views. It's like, okay, this guy's legitimately trying to not bullshit me. And I hope that that's what people see in Wisdom of Crowds.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, I mean, it's only natural as a human being to have these kinds of, I don't know, I mean, to have biases, to have immediate reactions to things that you disagree with. How do we check those biases? Like, how do we engage critically, generously with people or with, pieces that we don't initially agree with, give them the benefit
Right.
of the doubt?
Yeah. So like, one thing I do is, the Greek philosopher Aristotle writes about virtues, and usually a virtue is the midpoint between too much and too little of something. So courage is the midpoint between being kind of foolhardy and reckless and being a coward on the other extreme. And he says if you're deficient in one way or another from the virtue, you need to aim for the other extreme in order to get back to the middle. So if you're too scared of everything, you have to act rashly and reckless so that you end up back in the middle. Or if you're too like not generosity is also like a midpoint between giving away all your stuff and not giving away any of your stuff. So to be generous, if you don't give any away of your stuff away, maybe there has to be a period in your life when you're just giving away a lot of your stuff, so that eventually your soul goes back to the middle. And I think like when it comes to like opinions or like what sources I want to read and include in the newsletter, I'm like and like for example, I'm very biased on the deportation question. Like I don't like deportation to the Salvadoran prison. And but I sort of force myself to read the people that are defending it, the people that I most already don't like, people that I'm biased against, and it's sort of even like a physical thing. You just sort of I'm gonna be like, all right, I'm gonna click on this and read it because my body's telling me not to in a weird way. Or the other day when we did something on Pope Francis, and there was an article that I really, really disagreed with, but it was well written and it had points that I didn't want to accept. So I was like, all right, we're going to link to this one. So you have to sort of force yourself.
And what would you, I mean, on a more like practical level, like what tips would you recommend to people who want to really engage a wider array of takes, opinions on current events? Like, how do you actually go about looking for different sources, or like, I don't know, like, what do you actually use social media as a place to get your news, your information? Like, what practical tips do you have?
I think like Ultimately, the aggregator has to be yourself in a way. So you can go to our newsletter, I would hope you do. You can go to Arts and Letters Daily. You can go to Google News, Twitter, whatever. Um, but go to multiple platforms, go to multiple aggregators, go to multiple websites, and have a sort of mental map of which newspapers are the left wing ones, which ones are the right wing ones, which pundits are interesting for X reason, which pundits are interesting for Y reason. You sort of have to build it yourself in your mind. You can't fully ever settle on one platform. Like a lot of people I know are like looking for the proverbial publication that's objective,
Mhm.
and there is none. You have to use your own conscience ultimately. Not even wisdom of crowds will be able to give you everything. Because even we have a slant of some sort. So just don't try to outsource your conscience to a
Mm.
platform.
Easier said than done, though. I mean, it's easier to, you know, to want somebody else to give us the right opinions, like to actually form our conscience is kind of arduous work. I mean, if you could speak from your own experience, like what does it take to form one's conscience, really use your freedom well? Like what has helped you to do that?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the same thing, like a question that opens you up,
Mhm.
and a predisposition to love the truth, regardless of your opinion of what the truth is. Love the truth more than your opinion of it. And I guess also a little bit of humility. You have to accept the authority of other people on a lot of things. On science, it's easy. Well, it's harder now. People question the authority of scientists as well, and sometimes they might have a point. But part of your search for knowledge is discerning who you should listen to, um, and that's also takes work. But um, the work of figuring out who to listen to, and the work of asking the questions, and the work of seeking is always going to be your own. No one's ever going to do that for you. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's like also it's like a spiritual thing, really, right? You have to train yourself to love the truth, and you have to revere it.
Um, Say a
Well,
little bit
I guess like
more.
it's easier to think like the opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to get whipped up into a frenzy,
Mm.
especially now with social media, for one side or the other, or
Yeah.
frenzy of outrage. And there's times that outrage is called for, but it usually doesn't help your personal discernment. You're not usually thinking when you're outraged and angry posting. So there
Mm.
has to be a bit of silence and a bit of just contemplation. Maybe that sounds a bit lame, but
I mean, but say a little bit more though about social media, like X in particular, especially with all the changes in the algorithm lately. I don't know how much you've been keeping up, but like a lot of people do get their information, their, commentary, their opinions from X. What impact do you think this is having on public discourse, the way that people are making sense of what's going on in the world around them?
yeah, I do wonder about that. So, like, particularly, like, I mean, everyone discovers this in different ways, but the war in Gaza really um, brought this to my attention that some people, just don't see the same. It's not just like videos of the bombings and things like that, but also just like different studies about whether or not the Israeli army is doing due diligence before it bombs highly civilian populated areas, things like that.
Mhm.
I think there's people that just don't see the same evidence and they just don't see the same videos, they don't see the same news reports. And in people I respect, like like one of the major newspapers in Israel, Haaretz, regularly writes about things happening in Gaza that would totally change the debate in the United States about Gaza if anyone would reference those articles, but no one ever does. No one ever sees them. So I'm like, well, how do you bridge this divide? I think like the only way that I can tell from my own perspective is like you have to want to bridge the divide. You have to want to understand the truth more than your opinion, and you have to be a certain politically detached in a way to really understand what's going on politically. Maybe that's too paradoxical, but only if you want to know the truth will you know the truth.
Yeah.
You are not going to stumble upon it necessarily. But I think
Yeah.
like everyone is, people are more and more suspicious of social media as a way of getting information, aren't they? Like it feels like we're in an age of skepticism more than anything. We're entering an age of skepticism more than anything.
But people still use it,
Yeah.
but they're not as trusting, you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, people that are friends or family that aren't in media, they don't spend all their time reading the news. They're just normal people. Like I just hear a lot more casual, disparaging remarks about the media in
Mhm.
general. And or I always hear about like aggregators that I've never heard of outside of friends of mine that like live anywhere but New York or DC, and they're like, "Have you heard of nobullshitnews.com and things like that?" Like, there's always the search for the objective aggregator that doesn't
Yeah.
actually exist.
Yeah.
But I don't blame people for that skepticism, by
Sure.
the way.
Yeah. All right. Before we open it up to the others, what is your hope for wisdom of crowds? And what do you hope that it's offering the discourse today, the internet?
Yeah, my hope is that it's a place where people can go to for a a excellent example of a debate that's going on in the discourse. So if you're wondering how to think about Israel Palestine, you'll find good examples of independent thinking there, even if you don't agree with it. If you're looking for just real thought and not punditry and not ideological regurgitation of talking points, that you'll think of us. We're not like as comprehensive as I wish we were because we don't have
Yeah.
the number of people writing for us yet. But I would like to cover more topics. But I think like if you want a dose of reality, you go to Wisdom of Crowds. It's my dream.
Mm, awesome. So yeah, the others, if you guys if you wanna unmute, if you wanna type a question in, feel
Just
free.
not everyone at the same time, please, because
Not everyone
it's
at the same time. Don't all go at once.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple notes I took. I enjoyed your discussion, so thanks for it. But yeah, a few ideas I had. Maybe they can spark some more discussion, maybe not, but I'll just share them and see what happens. Um, one of the things I thought was interesting was earlier when you were describing a sense that the reader gets midway through some kind of political reasoning process in a column or something, that the person is not trying to bullshit you as they think, that their thinking is transparent in some kind of way. And I had this interesting idea. I wonder what you think of. So a very popular ism of thinking, at least in the online communities, that I tend to brush up against is rationalism,
mm,
which doesn't have quite the same meaning as it does in philosophy. I was an undergraduate philosophy major, but it means something sort of kind of related nowadays. I'm thinking of like Slate Star, Codex, and people like that, right? And this idea I had was like, I wonder if what you're describing, that kind of like phenomenology of trust, if you will, reading like
mm,
a political piece, is if rationalism is almost like it answers that in a way, right? If like the person is like, I'll just be so thorough and account for every step of my reasoning process so exhaustively in my blog that the person knows that they can trust me because like we are in this crisis of trust in like the information landscape. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting idea. I was looking at the links that you sent to prepare for this, and I saw there's something about romanticism. So it's like
mm.
the romanticism on the rise, and maybe there's people are looking for some other way to address this crisis of trust that isn't exhaustive blog-based rationalism, right? There are limitations to that. But yeah, I'm just curious what you think of that thought.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting comment. And I have been reading a lot about rationalism lately because I had to do for my job a project on effective altruism and things like that. And I do find those thinkers, most of them really interesting. I mean, a lot of them are kind of out there too, right? And there, but as I'm sure you know, but I think okay, so you can get trust by completely showing your process of reasoning and saying, look, deductively, this is the argument. The problem is that I think that doesn't tell you what you've left out. So I think the reason why I'm not a rationalist is because I think the rationalists have kind of a limited view of what reason can do. We can go into that, but like I think that's one thing. And the other thing is like truth doesn't just come from reasoning; it comes from evidence and witness, right? So, for example, like Gaza, um, it's not just a problem of deduction. Some people want to make it a problem of deduction and say, well, obviously one side is a terrorist and the other one is not, and you want the democracy to be the terrorist, obviously. And, there's a certain truth to that. I don't like Hamas. I don't want them to win. Um, but obviously you need evidence and you need to know what's on the ground. So there's other sources of truth there that you have to weigh. Moral reasoning also is not deductive. It has a lot to do with intuition and with making prudential judgments about what's worse than other things, and so it's not exact. So I don't know if it lends itself to like rationalism. And then the other thing is like just experience. This is going to sound a bit vague, but like experience makes a big difference. So that someone that's been to Israel and Palestine just has a lot of knowledge that somebody that doesn't. And that doesn't mean you can't have an opinion on Israel Palestine if you haven't been there. Like somebody was making the point today that no one's been to North Korea, but a few people have been to North Korea from the West, but everyone has opinions about North Korea, which is true. But it is also true that if you've been to a place, there's a host of little information that you don't even know you have. So truth requires more than just rational deduction. But yeah, I do think it's an interesting like community, and a lot of what they do is interesting, especially effective altruism, which in some ways has shortcomings, but you can't really argue with the numbers of a lot of the stuff they've accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a useful tool in a toolkit for sure.
Yeah.
But like it's one of the few things that feels like an answer to these problems. And I think I picked up in your answer on a few gestures towards alternative, ways of addressing this difficulty in internet discourse, right? Yeah, I was just smiling when you mentioned being there because it was making me think of that. I don't know if you saw the Joe Rogan thing with Douglas Murray.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was thinking of that too. Yeah.
It's such a conundrum, right? But yeah, it seems like I was picking up like a sense of like virtue ethics almost. You mentioned Aristotle earlier, right? That like there's this kind of like virtuous character of the online information consumer. It's like no one's really sketched the virtue ethics out of this hypothetical person who's doing a good job of choosing the right sources and thinking responsibly. And yeah, I think that's a really curious thing. Like there kind of needs to be one, right?
Mm-hmm. I think like when people talk about information literacy, that's sort of what they mean, but you probably need more than just literacy, right? You need the character that wants to know the truth, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like
that. Yeah. Like people should talk about this. Like, what virtues do you need to be a good consumer of information? I think like in Europe, you always hear about Scandinavian countries doing stuff about doing all the stuff that we should be doing. And one of the things I heard is like in Finland, they have information literacy classes, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not economically expedient for the media, but that's how America works. Other thoughts, other questions? I have one more I want to ask.
But Joe, I'm curious, like the topic of trust. So I heard you mention that. Yeah, I think that's like under discussed how important trust is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What role does trust play for you in all this?
Yeah. So I think what was coming up for me when I was trying to kind of think through, your answers and what might complement them. There seems to be so much in the architecture of the information systems now that makes them too hard. They're wickedly hard problems. And so I think probably stepping down one layer and make infrastructure conversations, I think, need to happen. Yeah, like these days I've been, I make content and write sometimes as well. And I've been spending a lot of time recently researching democracy in Taiwan, digital democracy initiatives, Audrey Tang in particular, really interesting ideas about building kind of information infrastructure, because we're so incentivized that I don't, it's like I also used to teach, and I remember there was a documentary once I saw called Waiting for Superman. The concept being, it was talking about education reform, and it was like, our system right now, and you can see it reflected in pop culture, right? There's a lot of feel-good movies about this heroic saint-like teacher who rescues a bunch of kids, right? That we're waiting for some super character. And I think this, this hypothetical like virtuous information war that we're just discussing is almost a similar like superhero as character. It's just, I mean, I'm on Twitter and I commit a bunch of intellectual crimes as I scroll and form opinions every time, right? So I think like creating an infrastructure around it is really interesting. There's this one thing I saw called Polis. It's like a social consensus tool, but it was actually the inspiration for community notes on Twitter. If you've seen community notes,
yeah.
So like it rewards bridge building. So we'll use machine learning to like cluster profiles and people into like certain tribes. And then it will find comments where disparate tribes upvote the comment. And then that will be surfaced. And that's how community notes works, right? And then Polis does like a lot more with that kind of thing. So I think like some kind of informational change to our infrastructure that can build trust, because I don't think, superheroes will be able to do it alone.
Yeah. No, I take your point. So I mean, like ideally, the old structure was the newsroom with its editors and things like that. So I take it that like the New York Times is not a structure that you trust, or you do, or it would.
I'd open it up there. I don't know. I think like I personally, it would confirm I'm a center left person, so it would confirm my existing point of view. So I'd have no problem with it, I think. But like the world insisted on the New York Times worldview being contradicted pretty brutally last year, right? So yeah, I mean, I think history has chosen that we need to more critically examine that worldview. Yeah, I don't know. I think people got away with a lot more stuff in the past. But it brings up this weird question, right? Of like how wrong are the elites? How consistently untrustworthy are the elites? They're humans. They're untrustworthy sometimes. Some of them are untrustworthy most of the time. Are all of them untrustworthy? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like an open question.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think about a lot is this idea that we're going back to the 19th century in terms of media, that you used to have newspapers that sort of wore on their sleeve what their orientation was politically. And in Europe, it's still like that in many places, like Italy, I think it's still like that. And we're just going back to that, and we just have to sort of accept it. And in fact, maybe it's a better way to have, it's a better media environment, because you don't have these Walter Cronkite type structures where they would pretend to be the conscience of the nation. And maybe there's something to that. I don't know if that would make people more cynical about truth or less smarter or less smart, but I guess what I'm against is the idea that, or maybe this is where we disagree, that there can be a structure that can be that Walter Cronkite for the nation, and then we just access that structure, and then it's going to be there. Because like even if you have a really good like community notes system, it could be that the community is wrong, right? You still have to, like, the buck stops with your conscience. Eventually you have to decide who to listen to.
Yeah. I think that reveals like techno optimism is certainly a bias of mine. Yeah, I mean, I
definitely think technology can help. Like the status quo can be improved by technology for sure.
But ultimately there's that virtue question. There's like a character question. I think that's baked into democratic societies in general, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is also why you want to educate the people in a democracy, right? I think that's one thing that people don't talk enough about. It's like if you want a democracy, you have to train people to be part of a democracy. That's kind of a cliche to say, but I don't think people say it enough.
Yeah. No, I'm fully on board. I was very passionately into Dewey and pragmatism when I was studying. Big fan of that kind of thinking. I had another note maybe you'd be interested in talking about. Trey, if you ever want to jump in, feel free. But one of the notes I made was so I was looking through both of y'all's works as I was about to jump in here, and there was this mention. Postmodernism is not my area of experience or whatever, but I was looking at the piece. I actually had it saved. I'm going to subscribe to your Substack right away. But I just had saved in my reader the piece. Know what time it is? Do you know what time it is that you wrote? I think in March.
Yeah, yeah.
And it sounded interesting. I started clicking around through your zines, Stephen, and it was like the preface, I think, to the newest one talks about postmodernism a little bit. That there's a kind of like we're in a postmodern era now after November, debatably maybe. And I found that really interesting. I think there's like something that's related to sort of what we were talking about earlier. So, you know, postmodernism, one of the common themes is this suspicion of a meta overarching narrative, right? And that, you know, the purpose of like the Wisdom of the Crowds newsletter and other things is to sort of offer, if not a grand narrative, at least some kind of narrative that makes sense of this schizophrenic information environment, right? And it seems like I guess I wonder if there is. I was thinking about this earlier. I don't know. This is a big heap of junk, but maybe you'll find something interesting to say. But like it's you know, with the end of the Cold War and with the end of history, there's been this malaise in liberal societies, and some people kind of attribute Trump's rise to that malaise, that ennui and boredom and disillusionment, right? And your piece mentioned this sort of like mirage. I mean, you sounded skeptical of the Trumpian postmodern, you know, replacement grand narrative, right? Some kind of Greenlandic Mars-ish thing, right? A golden age of some sort on the way. But I wonder if you have any ideas of what, like, do you think that like an animating grand narrative of our well-educated democratic society where we trust each other again is necessary or you know, an important component to building this kind of healthy discourse you picture? And do you see any sources of those narratives kind of forming right now?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I wrote that piece not knowing, and I finished it not knowing. So I certainly like don't believe in the Trumpian golden age. As much as like, I mean, I think 5 years ago I admired Elon Musk a lot more, right? And it was interesting to have at least a guy that is inventing stuff to make the world better in the physical plane, like Tesla. You know, it's a noble project. At least it might help the environment. But that's, you know. I think on a personal level, people do. I don't know if there can be a publicly held big historical narrative anymore. I don't know if techno optimism is one of those narratives, but it leaves like to me, it's like why? What do you want to do with all this new technology that's going to make your life easier? And why do you want to live longer? What are you going to do with the extra time? Yeah. You know, I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation. And my favorite thing to do with that show was to point out how inadequate its vision of the future was, because it's a sort of like liberalism in space narrative that is really kind of boring until they meet evil aliens that cause wars, and then all of a sudden things become interesting again. But what is the grand narrative there even? Like, yeah. I don't know. I'm also just thinking out loud here, but.
Yeah,
what do you like? Like, I do think we need structure to our time and a sort of narrative to history, or at least a cyclical narrative like we had before in ancient times. But I don't know how we get that now.
Yeah. Stephen, do you have any ideas? I'd only read the first half of the preface.
No, I mean the whole kind of premise of my Substack is that yeah, I mean postmodernism, which, you know, it's hard to define because there's one iteration of postmodernism, but in general calls into question these meta narratives, you know, turns everything over to the subject, which could just make everything kind of nihilistic. But I think now that we're in this phase of postmodernism, there's space to recover this desire for some kind of meta narrative, to search for something that is objectively true, that is transcendent, and that gives meaning to my subjective experience. So I don't have hope that there's going to be this collective recovery of some grand meta narrative. I also don't think I want that. I think the good thing about the state that we're in is like we have the freedom to seek out some kind of greater truth, seek something that transcends our individual lives, which can unite us not on like the grand like national level, but like on the local level. Like the fact that like there are communities, small communities that are very vibrant, that are, making people's lives more full, but also doing good for society. To me, that's hopeful. And again, like I'm not naive about the kind of like nihilistic bent of postmodernism. And ultimately the door it opens for like for power to go unchecked, for power to really manipulate, instrumentalize everyday people. But again, like I'm hopeful, and I think yeah, this is why conversations like these are really important because we're looking for something together. We're not just sitting here, uh, wasting away until the end. It's like no, like let's find something that's meaningful that
Well, here's a thought. What about whatever we might say that we believe, to the extent that we're all using the same technology and are gradually becoming integrated into this global network of technology? Aren't we all just participating in that meta narrative, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately sort of where I'm drifting towards. Like, I mean, because like you look at, it's a curious time. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Benjamin Bratton at all, or the Anti-Guerra. So really interesting guy, philosophy person out of UC San Diego, I think. But he talks a lot about the planetary, the idea of he's kind of in the James Lovelock kind of lineage, Gaia hypothesis-y kind of the big Earth system, but he kind of updates it to internet times. So I think he would say something related to that. But yeah, going back to the techno optimism piece, I think there's something really interesting there because especially like right now, because you saw the tech right kind of developing something that felt like it was solidifying into an attempt at a movement, right? They called it effective accelerationism for a while, but it was this kind of Muskian thing. It was the Muskian MAGA metamorphosis, but like we're going to cut regulation, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to just like get AGI, we're going to do all this stuff, and it like you can start to see that crack begin now. The tech right is beginning to splinter. Who knows what the future of that holds? But it's almost as if there's this like floating accelerationism idea that gained a bunch of steam, but is now sort of without a parent as Musk steps down and that movement begins to get wobbly. So I do think that the technology people have tried the most. I don't know if they're good ideas at unifying ideas, but yeah, I think that's the closest that we're at right now. But it does kind of speak. I was thinking when you mentioned the Musk 2018 Musk, it's like there's even that's like kind of thin compared to like what I would want to wave the banners around for. Like, okay, what are you going to do when you get to Mars? You know what I mean? There's not that much that humanity must become interplanetary. Like we must live forever and not die. It doesn't speak to my soul,
Yeah. The head of the space program in the 60s of the German philosopher, it was a scientist, who was actually a Nazi. You guys know how, like, after World War II, the Nazi scientists had to be bought out by the US and by Russia. He said, we need philosophers to figure out why we should go to space. And he was like a Heideggerian. And Heidegger has this whole thing about how human beings are the shepherd of being. We speak for being all that. So there's a sort of destiny of the human beings in the cosmos. Yeah, I don't see that in like rationalist community. Maybe I don't know it as well. Like it's sort of like we want to be out there because we want to be out there. And but that's why I'm curious about you though, because you said you're center left, but you're also a techno optimist. It's like a unicorn now. It's like, sure, what do you believe in? What is the future that you believe in?
I'm trying to boot us up. Yeah, I want the center left, techno accelerationists to get in gear. I think the cards.
And what's the vision of humanity? What's the vision of humanity?
So I think it does go back to the Bratton idea for me these days, or just generally speaking, like planetary thinking, and that like this like the Tang thing I was talking about, Audrey Tang is like the thinker or doer I'm most excited about these days, but just developing these kind of like democracy technologies and then distributing them across your country and sort of letting this collective intelligence come out. and yeah, becoming something more than we are, as this sort of supercharged techno pluralism can kind of like harness our intelligence, like social media done with enlightenment values, with just serious, very deep philosophical thinking behind them. Tang and this Harvard economist, Stanford, somebody, Glenn Whale, who's like an economist guy. They had a book called Plurality that they released recently, and they talk about like the nature of disagreement. You probably like this, like the nature of disagreement in pluralist societies as being similar to oil that is just being discovered. And right now, we are interacting with this oil, and it's carcinogenic, and if we fuck with it too much, it explodes and kills us. But there's this like way, there's this world on the way in which that resource can actually be harnessed in this kind of collective intelligence way. So yeah, if I had
that's really interesting.
it would be that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check that out for sure. That sounds really interesting.
Cool.
Are techno optimists into Teilhard de Chardin anymore, or the Jesuit paleontologist?
Yeah. Where do I know that from? Can you
people in tech used to be into him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, full disclosure, I do believe in a meta narrative insofar as I'm Catholic.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But like, I'm a postmodern Catholic, so that means we have all these questions.
Yeah.
But he has this idea called the noosphere.
Yeah. Okay.
That's probably
I've heard of this person a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. It used to be. But yeah. But anyway, I wonder how Trey's doing.
I do have a quick question, and this might be, it's as far as in consuming news and information, it's where's the function of time come in? Because used to be you could read a few newspapers, and which was easy to do on a regular basis because they came in the morning, they were delivered. You get local, national, you had it there, and you do that regularly, you're on top of things. And I know there was bias, but guess what? If you believe they were biased, you probably knew about the bias, and you could accommodate for that, I think, relatively easily. But today with the just the plethora of sources, and I'm going to throw another little wrench in here. Something I noticed that have issue with is going from app to app. Even just the newspaper apps, like the FT, the New York Times, it's like one of them for the longest time was backwards to the other with how you kind of navigated it. And I'm just like, I'm capable of doing this, but so much energy is expended trying to, go from article to article maybe and whatnot. And then when you throw in Substack, which, I think the app, Substack's obviously a startup, but the app has a ways to go in my opinion, just from the UI and whatnot. So I've tried to switch to, and then reading through email is not ideal. But anyway, getting back to just the function of time, how much is a person expected? Let's even say above average. Let's not talk about the average person, but in consuming the news and outside of just consuming podcasts, which my goodness, I just don't think audio is the way to, if exclusively audio is not the best. And if you get in your silo, you're not going to learn anything. You're just going to hear the same thing over and over again and not even be aware that there's another side to the argument.
Yeah.
And so it's, so again, just personally, I'm running up against with like, how much time, just hours in the day is there, and what to do. Sorry if I don't even know if I had a question at the end, but I just wonder if you thought about that.
No, I think it's a really good point. And I think that's why a lot of people are searching for the ultimate aggregator, the ultimate source, or the most trustworthy source, or whatever, one place where they can get everything, because people don't have time. But I think, so I think that speaks to Joe's point about different structures helping out. But I think at the end of the day, it also means that people have to be discerning in what they choose to consume and how to best use their time, and also what you need to know, because it is kind of true that, well, I don't know, this is tricky. Do we part of me thinks we do need to know a lot about like what's going on in the world, but part of me thinks that we don't, right? So am I a bad citizen of a democracy if I think we don't need to know what's going on in Western Europe or Eastern Europe? Maybe if you're a citizen of the US, you should know more than the average citizen of another country because we just are involved in more stuff. But I think you have a good point. I don't know if there's a solution to it beyond there being better structures of aggregation, but also just you have to have a sense for what's the best way to use your time. So,
It's almost like I
yeah,
feel like there's a cultural, sorry to interrupt, but like a cultural niche for not Walter Cronkite, but like a Walter Cronkite-esque aggregating system of some kind. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
No, and look, I should plug my own stuff too. Like we in crowdsource, it is supposed to be something that if you're like a low information or a low time person, just like a normal like lawyer or a computer programmer or whatever, you just want to get a sense of what's going on. That's what crowdsource is supposed to give you, right? So I wouldn't claim that it's comprehensive, but I do claim that it'll give you like a sense of the lay of the land of any particular topic that we're covering that week and make you conversant in it. That's what we hope for crowdsource. So if it is the only thing that you look at, it's better than average, I would say. That's what I hope for. But we do make it a little bit idiosyncratic precisely because we want to give you something that you can't get from ChatGPT or something like that. But yeah. And I guess we're sort of making the decision, like, what should a democratic citizen of the United States want to know about? And that's how we choose the topics that we cover.
So let's Sandy say a little bit more about using Substack to do what you guys are doing because I mean on our salon on Monday with Ross Marcan, like he was saying like okay, ultimately it's not going to provide a long-term solution to the ills of journalism and media, but he thinks it's adding something that's been missing, namely writers being able to speak in their authentic voices, being able to put their actual personalities into their work, whereas like when you're writing a polished piece for a legacy publication, you kind of have to really like tone that down and fit this algorithmic tone model. So I mean, what would you say about Substack? Like, are you optimistic? I mean, how has your experience been using it?
I think it's been pretty good. I
Yeah.
mean, we we're able to do a lot with it, and we're able to connect with a lot of people through it, expand, publish our work. And I believe the Substack CEOs that they put out a lot of comments as well, and they do seem to be people that genuinely want to sell writing as opposed to sell advertising. And I think part of the big problem with the dissemination of culture in general now is that companies make money largely through subscriptions, through advertising, and there's less of an investment in the actual product. But I do think that Substack is not a utopia. It's not going to solve every problem. They have to make it more. I agree with Trey that it's not the most readable app, and I also do think we need editors. We can't just have these like long pieces meandering. I know Ross Barkan likes that, but I don't as much.
He does it well, but it gets tiring after a while,
Yeah,
sure.
no, his stuff is good. But sorry, Trey, go ahead.
I have a last quick comment, just to ponder. I guess it was 2 years ago now. I, for 6 months, read every economist from front to back,
Oh, wow.
um, and and then it's like I stopped, and I've read The Economist for 20 something years, I guess, and then after that, I've barely read it at all, and
Hmm.
so
Mm.
and I don't even know what that means or what that says, but I was like, when I did that, I thought I'll really know what's going on in the world, and I came away with, yeah, I learned some stuff, sure, but at the same time, it was like it goes into something that was said earlier. It's like someone is only going to be able to give things from their perspective, um, unless they work incredibly hard at it, and still they're going to have a perspective.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but also it goes back to the hours in the day. I'm like, I mean, that was the only thing I was reading then, because that's the only
Hmm.
time I had. So it's the like trying to find a way to efficiently be selective, and intentional in choosing what we read and getting a balance. is incredibly hard to do when you also have, it's not the only thing in your life.
Right.
you know?
Right.
So that's all.
Was there anything that happened that made you want to stop reading The Economist?
Um, no, it was kind of silly, really. It was like New Year's Eve goal. I'm like, and I'd read it for years, but I'm like, let's see if I can read an entire issue. Let's just
Mm.
see if that's possible. Because I remember, what was it? The New York Times. It's like if you tried to read one of those years ago, it's take what, 8 hours in a day, and it's like nobody can do that.
Mm.
And I stumbled across the Financial Times when I wasn't in any industry at all. But I was like, I can read this in a day, like easily, because you flip through it. They got the headlines, articles are short. I'm like, this is what I need. Uh, and so, as that context for The Economist, I also thought it would be better than it was. Not to talk down about it, because I still think it's great, but um, I just thought it would make me more aware. And the reality was, everything was so general. It just it didn't. Like, I think I got out of it was, I knew the names, I knew something had happened, but could I really converse on the topic or ask questions? And I think the answer became no, not really. It's just I was just aware. So
Yeah.
Mm.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's wrap things up. Yeah, so I encourage everyone to follow Wisdom of Crowds, but really look at the crowdsource and pay attention to, I don't know, this very interesting technique that Santi and the team at Wisdom of Crowds is taking to making sense of what's going on in current events and on internet discourse, because for me it's been very helpful. And yeah, I mean, in the midst of a very chaotic mediascape, like, we need something to ground us or to frame all this content that we're consuming. So that being said, we have two more salons in the series coming up in about 2 weeks. So check out the page for that. But Santi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was great. And yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you, Trey. Have a good one. See you
All
guys soon.
right, take care. Bye.